You're listening to Raising Relationships, a podcast by the South Carolina Infant Mental Health Association. Here are your hosts, Amaris and Tiffany.
Well, hello there and welcome back. Amaris, I'm just so thankful for this space and being able to be together to talk about such important topics together.
Absolutely. We talk about cup filling, and this has absolutely been cup filling, where we've been talking about infant mental health, and we've been talking with other providers in our states who love this work the way that we do. So just a fulfilling experience for me. I've really enjoyed it.
And so filled with hope and possibilities. And that's one of the reasons that I love infant mental health so much. Before we get to today's episode, I want to thank you for listening and supporting Raising Relationships. And if you're just finding us or a new listener, this is episode 4, and we'd love for you to go back to episode 1 and listen all the way through.
Definitely check out the last 3 episodes because we've been telling the story of Shontee and her son Micah throughout this series, and then featuring conversations with infant mental health experts to help us dive deeper into the broader issues and topics at hand.
So far, we've talked to SCIMHA CEO Carrie Shontee about the supports for families in South Carolina. We've talked in depth about expulsion from child care centers and how it's not really a cut and dry issue.
And last episode, we heard Shontee mention Circle of Security, which she was referred to through SCIMHA's Help Me Grow program.
I was taking an 8-week class with Circle of Security, and that was wonderful because that taught me how I can explain things to Micah, how I can deal with Micah, how I can tame my anxieties, how I don't have to be weak, I don't have to be mean, I don't have to give him a complex. I don't have to make him sit there and put pressure on him because he's expected to do these things and he's having a hard time doing them.
In listening to Shontee describe her experiences with both Help Me Grow and Circle of Security, you can almost hear the relief in her voice. Shontee explained to us that she acquired tools and lessons through these resources that she still relies on today.
I mean, I would go there and I would be happy because I knew that I had support. I knew that I was going to be able to say, hey, this is what Micah did today, and talk it out. Plus, I've just learned valuable lessons. I still look at my booklet when I'm in doubt of certain things, and I always mention it to his therapist, and she starts smiling about it. I even mention it to the guidance counselor at Jonesville. So I had to retrain my brain on everything pertaining to Micah. And it's been interesting because I'm like, the things that I did with my first 2, oh no, that was nothing compared to what I've had to do now. And so I know that we're going to continue on this journey.
There's that word again, journey. Every journey needs helpers. So let's continue this episode with Dr. Mackenzie Soniak, who's involved in the Circle of Security program.
Dr. Mackenzie Soniak is the Infant and Early Childhood Capacity Building Director with South Carolina Infant Mental Health Association, and she is a clinical psychologist who has worked with infants and young children and their families for 6 years, and she is endorsed as an infant mental health specialist. So welcome to the show, Mackenzie. So glad to have you here.
Thanks, Tiffany and Amaris. I'm so happy to be here.
We would just like to start out by asking you a little bit about yourself. Who are you personally and professionally? We know you work at SCIMHA, but what got you to that point? We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, thanks for asking. I was working in a evaluation program when I was in graduate school and was introduced by a powerhouse woman who was bringing infant mental health to the state of New Hampshire. And when I met her, I said, I want to be you when I grow up. And she inspired me with how I started looking at my training and my career moving forward. And so when I had been introduced to this concept around relationships and how we work with others and the resilience that we can see in people and the healing power that we can see from the people who are with us and able to be with us in these difficult circumstances. And I just really fell in love with the people, the work, and being able to see the changes that could happen when we pour our hearts into another individual, because that's essentially what infant mental health is all about. It's by pouring into somebody else's emotional cup, into their hearts, and really being able to see them and be with them in really difficult times. And you asked kind of that aspect of it personally, because that's who I am in my family. That's who I am with my friends. When I started, when my nieces came into the world, like I got to see that firsthand with my siblings in this like new way. And so this was just all about who I was in my family and with my people. And I get to now bring this into my work every single day.
Mackenzie, I love how you're highlighting this blend of your personal and your professional self, and how that can really just be with this very relationship-based work. You can show up that one person. It doesn't have to be these two separate work person and personal person. But I love that you didn't have to create a whole new self, that you got to bring your whole entire self into this field.
Thanks, Amaris. Yeah, I definitely believe that that's probably what I love the most about this work, is that I get to be me and have the people around me do the same things that I'm trying to do for the family. And so as a psychologist and kind of thinking about those principles around infant mental health, and I'll mention this now because it's mentioned, and I think it'll be a topic of our conversation later as we talk about circle of security, is this idea of what we call parallel process, that when we are able to get that resource from other people in our adult relationships, we're able to then pour it into our work that we're doing with parents, and that those parents can pour it into the cups of their children. And so it's so important to really hold all of who we are along with who the families are going to be around them, because they might be getting it from us as professionals, but also from the other people and relationships around them too. So always searching for those sources of resilience.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And thank you so much for bringing up Circle of Security. As one of the facilitators at SCIMHA of Circle of Security, we know your love and your passion for Circle of Security, especially in making sure that our state is infused with other Circle of Security facilitators. So if we were someone who walked up to you and we had no clue about Circle of Security, how would you explain to us what Circle of Security is and why it's so important to the work of infant and early childhood mental health?
It's a really good question, Amaris. So I think I would start by having the zoomed out version of it, saying it's an actual circle. And it's a graphic that the folks who created the model were able to come up with to really be a map of how all relationships work. Right. And so that's what I love so much about it, is because it is this relatively simplistic graphic that explains the really complicated nature of relationships. And so on that graphic, you really have three parts of the circle. You have the top part of the circle, which is this way of the child going out and exploring their world. This is a need for all children in order to grow and learn and develop. And then you have this bottom part of the circle, which describes how all children need to come into us, and they need to feel supported and have somebody who they can have fill their emotional cup, to hear them out, to listen to them, to welcome them in when their world feels scary. And then you have the hands, and really those are the parents. Those are the people who have to balance this being a wise, strong, kind person, and understanding that every child needs that. And I always say that this is the complex nature of all relationships, because even you and I have a circle.
Yeah,
Me and
we
Tiffany
do.
have a circle. Even in our adult relationships, we still see this need for somebody to kind of bear witness to us being out in our world and doing things in our world as adults, the exciting things about our jobs, going to buy that plant that you're really excited to bring into your home and have a plant garden, to coming back in when you've had a really hard day and you need somebody to really listen and understand what happened and just be there with you. And so this doesn't stop just in childhood. It describes relationships throughout our lifetime. And so I always start with talking about that, and then say, there's then these components of utilizing this map and sharing it with parents. Because let's be honest, there are so many parenting books out there. Everybody has advice about what the best parenting method is. Everybody has advice about how you should discipline your child or curb a child's behavior in some way. And it gets really overwhelming and it gets convoluted. And so what Circles of Security does as a parenting program is it takes all of that away and says, let's get back to that simple way of thinking about it. And then you can decide what works for you of setting up these parameters and limits for your child based on your values and what is going to work best for your individual child. So it's really non-prescriptive in that way, which I think is a different approach than we see sometimes for other parenting models, what's out there. And then I think that the reason that, again, I really like to utilize this is because it can go from the parent who is feeling uncertain and may just have natural anxiety because they're a first-time parent and they're saying, man, oh man, I really hope that I can do well for my kid and set them up on the right path, to a parent who has maybe experienced some of their own trauma, or there's trauma that they've existed in with their child, and perhaps they even might have been on the end of being involved in child welfare because of abuse or neglect. And it can even address concerns within those families as well, with kind of, again, bringing them back to this basic concept of this complicated thing that we are all trying to do.
And Mackenzie, I love how as complicated as we know parenting can be, right? As we have parents listening to us right now who are facing the complexities of parenting, the difficulty sometimes of parenting. And I love how you give this view of Circle of Security of just being very simple. You said something earlier. You said we all need someone to bear witness to our day, to our lives. We just need somebody to be with us. And Circle of Security really sounds like that very simple, I am here with you through life, no matter what you're experiencing. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I just have to be here with you. And so I love how you are sharing with parents, other caregivers, early intervention is how just simple this Circle of Security can really be, and how it expands way past our 0 to 5 years. So thank you for that. I love it.
How simple it can be, but also how complex it is at the very same time, and how those two can work together in harmony. And it doesn't feel like it can sometimes. It's really interesting because all three of us are Circle of Security facilitators. And I think that we're big believers in the program and what it can do, because like you said, Mackenzie, it's not prescriptive. It's not do 1, 2, 3. It really is attuning to each and every child and their need in the moment.
It's going to help us learn that behavior is not just for behavior's sake. Behavior has meaning. Behavior is a communication to tell us something really important in young children about needs that young children have. And it's also going to help us learn that stuff is going to get in the way of responding the way that maybe we wish that we could respond all the time.
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Can be everything from how confusing a child's behavioral communication might be. It's not always clear, to the stuff that comes up for us as the adults who are with those children, where we have our own histories that we're bringing to the table,
right.
Our own expectations around parenting, our own potential shame and blame that we might be holding as we are entering into these spaces saying, I need help, because that's a really vulnerable thing for parents to bring to the table and to bring to a professional to say, I need help.
I need help. I love everything Mackenzie has shared. And I think something when you talk about that, the vulnerability that it takes to be able to stand before someone and say, I need help. I think a lot of that comes from a lot of how we were parented shows up in our parenting, right? Yeah. And so how that can in itself bring a lot with us. Shame, like you said shame already, and guilt and fear. And so I love that piece about Circle of Security, is that it really helps address and helps us to see, what happened in our own parented experiences that may be showing up, and how can we really change the narrative and change the way that we respond as a caregiver. I think that's such an important piece. That's my favorite piece of Circle of Security.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, when I think about the work that I've done and with parents, one of the most heartbreaking cases that I've ever worked with, part of what was happening was this parent was really experiencing so much shame within the work that we were doing. And I saw how that showed up when she entered into her relationship with her son. She didn't feel like she could be her best self. She was so worried about the ways that people were viewing everything that she brought to the table as a parent. And eventually she ended up almost talking herself out of her parenting role. And, unfortunately wasn't able to reunify with her child. And that's never what we want to see within this work. We want children to be safe, but it was ultimately, again, what she was bringing from her past that was showing up with her child in the room. And this kiddo loved her so much. What people don't realize about young children is that they ultimately want to please their caregivers. And they want to feel close to their caregivers.
Such an important point.
It feels so challenging when they are separated from their caregivers. And honestly, that's when we tend to see this idea of misbehavior, right? It's when we feel kind of confused and lost and out of control, because we're not feeling a sense of safety and security. And so you even think about yourself as an adult. We all still have temper tantrums as an adult. We just don't call it temper tantrums, right? So we've got these moments where we feel really frustrated and maybe we don't act in our true sense of self, our values, and with the integrity that we hold ourselves to. And we might, do things that feel inauthentic. But that's oftentimes because we aren't rooted in that safety and security. And kids need to be rooted in that safety and security within their adult relationships.
Mackenzie and Tiffany, I'd love for you to kind of take us deeper into this. You're mentioning the safety that children need in these relationships and how it really can impact their behavior when they're looking and they're seeking that safety. But it's not just with their parent caregiver, right? We want to expand that to all of their caregivers. And so, Tiffany, I wonder what questions you have or what wonderings you have about how Circle of Security fits or how it can be extended to all caregivers, even the caregivers in those early childcare settings.
I think especially for those caregivers in those early childhood settings, there's so many barriers and obstacles that they're facing right now for many, many reasons, right? But the idea of having a circle of security to follow and being able to really tend to that connection that we've all been alluding to, tend to the experiences we've had in the past that affect us and how we manifest and how we show up every day. The fact that behaviors have meaning, all of that is so important in early care and education settings. So I would just love to hear your take on that, Mackenzie. What are some pieces there that fit for those early learning settings?
Absolutely. I think that you hit the nail on the head because it all fits within the early learning settings. Our at-home caregivers most oftentimes maybe are the people who we've identified as our parents, but, it could be foster parents, it can be grandparents. All of those folks are the first relationships that we might have, but they are only the first, that they're laying kind of this blueprint for how we're going to engage in our future relationships. And those future relationships have a lot of power to them because they might be these future relationships in which they are continuing to build on this narrative that we want children to have, that they are worthy of love and attention, that people, they can go to other people and people will support them, and that the world is a safe place in which they can flourish and live in their lives. But also, it can have other effects. So if those kind of caregivers who come after those primary caregivers, is why we call them, right? They're the first caregivers. If they can build on that by being supportive, like those teachers in those childcare programs, being able to say, I'm going to be your bigger, stronger, wiser, and kind support, your hands on that circle to see you and celebrate you and welcome you back in. It strengthens that narrative. If a child maybe didn't have that narrative with their first primary caregiver, it can rewrite their narrative about their worth of themselves.
I love that.
Or it can have a negative impact of saying, okay, maybe I had this first primary caregiver and not everybody is a safe person in my world. I can't go to everybody. And that can be really confusing for a child because, again, then they're lacking that safety and security. And that's really hard for our childcare providers because they're not just doing that with one child or maybe a few children in their home. They're doing it usually with 14, 15 kids at one time who all are at different parts of that graph and out on that map. And it can feel overwhelming. And so our childcare providers, boy, they have the hardest job in the world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they really do. And so much kudos to the professionals out there who take care of our children. There's one piece I want to pull out that you just talked about too that I think is really important about circle of security. And it's the idea of these unspoken messages. So we respond to these children and we respond in a way we think is clear, but a lot of times we're giving messages that we don't even realize that we're giving, right? So if we're constantly or consistently not there to meet a child's emotional needs and we just say, go to your room until you've calmed down, that can really affect things as far as the messages they're telling themselves. I'm not worthy. Or when I have emotions, I'm supposed to deal with them privately. There's a lot of those messages that come across. So a big piece and kind of the moral of the story for me is when it comes to providers caring for these young children, how we respond to them shapes their view of the world and how they see people and relationships.
It's their view of the world, and it's their view of what's okay and what's not okay, right? And so, you think about a child who might be expressing anger over something that seems as simple as, I really wanted ice cream and you would not allow me to have ice cream. And it could just be because there was no ice cream, right? The adult, we have a rational thing behind why this is happening. But when that child expresses anger, when a caregiver feels overwhelmed by that expression, because it's hard to sit with anger, it communicates these feelings are bad and these feelings are not okay. Anger is not a bad feeling. It's something that feels uncomfortable for sure. I don't like to be angry. I'm sure other folks who are listening to this don't like it when it drives up in them when it is to feel angry.
I don't either.
Yeah, but for the very basics piece of it is that we need to know that emotions, all emotions are emotions and they're okay. And it's okay for us to express them, because if we learn how to express them, then we learn how to manage them. And so the way in which we start expressing them starts to change. And so if a caregiver is pulling away whenever a child is having this emotional outburst of anger, and that's communicating, when you are like this, your anger is not okay, that child doesn't have somebody who is sitting there teaching them, you're feeling angry right now. When you have this feeling in your body, what you can do is you can say, I'm feeling angry, rather than the super emotional outburst. Or if you have these things that you want to do, like breathing, that can help you get to the point where you can name that feeling that's inside of you. And so essentially, we want kiddos to be able to know that all emotions are acceptable and that the caregivers will sit there with them and they're going to help make sense of them with them.
So instead of shutting down those emotions, even if they're uncomfortable, like you said, we're really helping them to work through them.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
And I could see how that, again, applying that, the circle of security and understanding how we can be with our children, even in hard, heavy, big emotions, how that could be so helpful in the classroom. And like you said, in having to do that with multiple children it is so challenging. Not could be, it is so challenging and overwhelming. And so, when we think about these early childcare settings, and we've talked about it earlier about these high expulsion rates, because sometimes we have children who maybe consistently and repetitively have these high, big, large emotions. Anger might be one of them. And we see these high expulsion rates because of those behaviors. I just wondered, do you feel that using models like Circle of Security could supports like that really help in decreasing those expulsion rates and really equipping caregivers with the tools that they need to say, I understand anger is a big, hard emotion to handle, but here's a way that we can and still meet the needs of our children?
I absolutely do. And I think that it's in part why this model feels different than some of the other models that are out there, which really are trying to address the behavior with things like reward systems, like such as sticker charts or selective attention. So ignoring quote unquote bad behaviors, or kind of like using these visual systems of, oh, how was your day? Are you in the green zone or the yellow zone? And again, those are all things that I think we commonly see. And what it doesn't necessarily always get at is the adult part of the relationship, right?
Right.
It's the focus in on the child and the way that they are acting and responding to certain situations throughout their day. And I think that what Circle of Security does is that caregiver piece and the caregiver recognition for them to say, hey, I know that anger or shame or sadness even is something that feels hard for me to sit with. This particular child, when they express that, it feels maybe even harder because they remind me of my own child or something along those lines. And then saying, I'm going to try to do things different. It gives them this self-awareness so that they can take a step back and observe what they are doing when they are with the child, in addition to still remaining with that child in that moment where there is this high intensity need. And that doesn't mean that they have to stay with the child at all times if they're feeling so overwhelmed. There's this piece that I really love from the approach that says, if you are feeling so overwhelmed that you can't be present, that it's okay for you to take a break too. You're only human.
What a relief.
And then and then you get to step back in. You get to step back in and say, okay, I am here with you and let's be here together. And so it gives the parents and caregivers an opportunity to really recognize that internal sense of self and what is happening for them in those moments that feel really, really challenging.
I love that. I love that it is helping the caregivers, the adult caregivers, recognize what's happening in me that's making it difficult for me to show up for my child or this child in this moment, and how even just the slow down of thinking about what's happening inside of me as an adult caregiver really just, again, it builds that reflective capacity, the ability to be able to recognize and be aware of what's happening internally. I don't know about you, Tiffany, as Mackenzie was talking about circle of security, especially in those classroom settings, I keep thinking about Micah. I keep thinking about his experiences in his classrooms. I'm wondering for you, were you thinking about Shontee and Micah when she was talking about circle of security in the classrooms?
He absolutely was. I was thinking about how having this approach, thinking of behavior as the symptom of an unmet need and proceeding that way with compassion, not only for Micah, but also what's happening for me right now, like we were just talking about. My feelings matter too. I need to tend to those too. Just having that approach alone, what could have been for Micah in those settings when he was a little bit younger?
I think in hearing Micah and Shontee's story, there's going to be a lot of feelings about what Micah went through and what Shontee as a mom went through, and how they were able to kind of come back together through the work. But I also am thinking always about that childcare provider. And I'm wondering, what do they need? Who's filling their cup? Who is supporting them? Because I don't think, just as much as no child wants to be difficult, right? In circle of security, they say being difficult is just too difficult. They want to feel that connection. I think that that's the same for our childcare providers and parents, right? They want to feel connected to this child. They want to feel connected to others. And so it offers up a lot of compassion for all that were involved to say, wow, this felt so overwhelming that the only option felt like this child had to leave the classroom. We don't want that to be what happens for our childcare providers. We want them to feel supported too. Remember, they're on their own circles.
Right.
And so how do we, as an organization of SCIMHA and all the other supports that are around these childcare programs, provide that safety and stability for our workforce and for our families? Because it really does take a village to raise a child. We can't do it alone.
And Mackenzie, thank you for even helping us pull in. We had a conversation a little earlier with SCIMHA CEO Carrie Schnocke, and she said her hope for this work was that we would all be more compassionate towards each other, that we'd be able to extend that cup feeling that you keep talking about, that we'd be able to do that for each other. And I love how you've brought that back into this conversation, is that a huge piece of this infant and early childhood mental health work is holding all of the relationships in mind. And in those relationships and holding those relationships in mind, making sure that we're offering compassion. Just thinking about Micah, thinking about Shontee, thinking about Micah's caregivers, thinking about all the caregivers who may be listening to us today. I wonder if there's any last piece of wisdom or something that we didn't get to today that you really want to make sure you leave us with, a nugget that you want to leave with us today.
I think that one of the things that we have to keep in mind is hope. That's a really core principle of infant and early childhood mental health is this holding hope. Mm-hmm. I think that when we are able to hold that hope, we can start to see changes, because ultimately we don't want what happened with Micah and Shontee to continue to happen. It's illuminating a change that needs to happen. And it's not just a change for our South Carolina families and babies, but it's a change for our early care and education system and for the early childhood workforce. And so I think that as we continue to move forward, it's knowing that there are people who really care about this, who are working really hard every single day to hopefully make things a little bit better, one step at a time, to provide more supports that are going to meet families' needs and professionals' needs. And just ultimately knowing that you're not alone, that we are right here with you, and that there is a huge workforce that is along here with you too, all doing this work together.
Yes, we're all in this together, right?
And Mackenzie, thank you for being one of those people who deeply care about this work and who are working so hard to make sure that change happens and that hope can remain alive. So thank you for that.
As far as Circle of Security in the classroom, is there anything that we can preview that will be coming in the near future that we can be providing early care and education
Absolutely.
Professionals?
Yes. I am so excited to share this. So Circle of Security International, which is the organization that supports this dissemination of this work. There's obviously the parenting groups that are run by SCIMHA. They also have therapeutic programs that we're hoping to bring to the state of South Carolina. But their most recent addition has been Circle of Security Classroom. It is a model to promote this understanding of the simplistic view of complex relationships in the classroom environment. And SCIMHA will be having folks trained in order to be able to provide this support to classrooms across the state. And so we are excited to announce that launch as soon as we get that all settled in.
Oh, that's great news.
It's so exciting. I wish we had auditory emojis. Just picture it, okay? It's just the fireworks. Very exciting. We appreciate your time, Mackenzie, and your expertise, and also sharing a little bit of yourself with us too personally and what brought you to this work. We are looking forward to continuing the journey and really working together and collaborating on the behalf of babies and young children in South Carolina.
Thank you. Thank you both so much.
In the next episode of Raising Relationships,
we head to the classroom. Well, sort of. We'll connect with an educator and a mental health consultant to learn about PAIR, what it is, and how it helps.
Don't forget to share the show and review it on Apple Podcasts.
Raising Relationships is made possible by the South Carolina Infant Mental Health Association.
More information about SCIMHA and other resources can be found in the show notes. Thanks for listening.
This podcast is produced for the South Carolina Infant Mental Health Association by Story Studio Network.